That's Inga Warren. She's one of the pioneers of the field. She's an occupational therapist and has serial of academic degrees, and she's also a senior NICU trainer in the UK NICU Training Centre in College London, University College. She has done many things, but one thing I'd like to highlight is that she developed this scale, EVAN, for evaluation the quality of care given to infants during medical and nursing procedures. Look into that. That's a very good thing to use if you want to do quality projects. But also, of course, she has been involved in our standards, and she's also been involved in the Graydon standards that we will hear more about later this afternoon from Joy Brown. And during the last maybe 5 years, she has developed this fine program, which is now available in 12 languages and in training in over 20 countries across the world. I'm sure we will hear more about that. Inga.
So I've called this education for IFCDC in the Age of Glance to reflect this global initiative you've got going here with people from all over the world being able to tune in. I think it's amazing. Well done. Well, when we were looking at hang on a minute. I thought we had it all sorted out. Right, okay. So I was referring to this being in the age of glance because of the global nature of this program. So when we were doing the standards, we were looking at education based on those 3 principles that Björn referred to earlier. In other words, people need to know how important it is to manage care sensitively in order to protect the baby's brain. People need education that helps them to feel confident about working with families. And I was really struck by something that Sari said about a study that showed that many people are not very comfortable about even talking to families about things. And when you think of how inexperienced some of the health professionals that go into neonatal care are, it's not surprising that this is challenging.
This is something that Inga asked us, and we take it before a lecture. According to you, how important is it for the NICU staff to get organized education and training in infant behavior and infant observation? First alternative is one of the most important skills for the NICU staff. Second is equally important as every other skill in the NICU. And for a third, education in other skills like procedures and interventions are more important. And the fourth, this kind of training cannot be organized by the NICU. This kind of training cannot be organized by the NICU. And lastly, we do not need that kind of training. We don't need training in infant behavior and infant observation. As much as 61% of all the responders think that this is one of the most important skills in the NICU, for the NICU staff. And the 38% says it's equally important as every other skill in the NICU. And then we have, as you understand, just a very few percentage that the other things are more important, but none has discarded this altogether. So of course we have a skewed sample of NICU staff, but obviously you all think that this developmental part of the IFCDC is of importance.
Okay, so I have a stable internet connection and I'll run the slides.
Okay, so we're back to talking about education in the age of glance. Next slide, please. And when we were developing the standards, the 3 themes that we followed in developing an educational perspective was Björn has already mentioned, which is one of them is that sensitive care protects the brain. People also need to know more about how to be confident about engaging the family, and also managing the concept of individualized care. Next slide, please. Next one. You skip this one. Okay. So we need an educational pathway so that people can progress from a basic stage through up to expert stage. And I'll go through some of those steps in this presentation. Next slide, please. But they very much are built into the FINE program, which I will refer to quite a lot, because it is the one program I think that has a step-by-step progression from a basic beginner's level up to preparing people for expert level, which might equate to NIDCAP. The FINE program is very closely related to NIDCAP. It's like, you know, I suppose it's like mother and child or something like that. But it's also a close cousin to almost every kind of developmental care program. So it's not exclusive to one program. It was our intention to make it a universal and to be basically applicable to any model of developmental care. Next slide, please. It's widely used. As Björn mentioned, we now have translations into 13 languages and activity in 24 countries. So I think that demonstrates that it has filled a gap, and so we're continuing to develop it and to explore new ways of delivering it. Next, please. But if we think and start going through these steps one by one, the first step is about providing information, maybe sometimes instruction and advice. So this is the kind of learning that you might do in a classroom, or you might gather resources. And one of the things we wanted to encourage people to do was to collect resources that are appropriate for their unit, for their area, for their country. Because there will be different needs and different things will be available. Next slide, please. And of course, the internet is a huge resource. And today is just one very good example. However, there are pitfalls in the use of the internet. One of the things that I feel very uncomfortable about, for example, is the use of videos taken from the internet for teaching purposes, when those videos may well illustrate different aspects of the baby's care, but unfortunately are very often done watching care that is not respectful or kind to the baby. And this worries me quite a lot. So it is important to be quite ethical about what kind of videos you use for teaching. Next, please. I think it was in Mandy's presentation, we referred to apps and websites for parents. And if we're looking at educational materials, we also want to look at other apps and websites that might be relevant for professionals. And I came across this work done by Justine Doll and colleagues in Canada, where they had evaluated websites and apps for quality, usability, and credibility. And I put them up here, though, because although they're meant for parents, these papers do give you some very good ideas of tools that should be used for evaluating things that you find on the internet. So I thought they were quite useful from that point of view. Interestingly, they weren't enormously impressed with the quality, usability, and credibility of what was out there. Next, please. And then, of course, we have databases of systematic reviews, which are very useful. I recently came across the Joanna Briggs Institute based in Adelaide, and I thought it was quite interesting that they all have also have a lot of systematic reviews about perinatal and neonatal interventions in developing countries, which might be quite useful when we're looking at a global perspective. And then there's the Cochrane database. The evidence-based standards from the IFCDC and the Gravens, which Joy will talk about later, are going to be a magnificent resource for us. And the fact that they are well referenced and they are evidence-based is enormously useful. And then you can also find self-assessment tools on the internet. So the NIDCAP nursery program is available. And I think the American Neonatal Nurses Association also have some self-assessment programs. Next, please. Oh yes, and then with FINE, we're developing an e-learning package as an introductory package for FINE, which will be available later in the year, but only in English. That's been funded in Australia. Nadine Griffiths is developing that. And if people want to translate it, they'll need to find their own funding to do that. Next. Then several other ideas have been put forward. Kay Spence in Australia made a good suggestion that maybe rather than have a textbook, which we were thinking of, we could have a shared platform for simple fact sheets. So we could have a range of fact sheets that could be easily updated, but also could be easily translated, and that were in language that were accessible to people at all levels, not just an advanced educational level. We also thought it would be helpful to have shared research questions to help build on evidence of effectiveness of education. And a core group, FINE group, have been working on that. And we have got now some questions that we're refining, and we hope other people will look at. If you want to know what they are, you can contact me. My email will be at the end. You can contact me and I can share those with you. And then, of course, there's today's conference, and maybe this is the way forward, and we'll need to think of more ways, more things that we can share this way. Next. However, giving people facts isn't always successful. You can tell people as much evidence as you like, but a lot of people really badly want to stick to their own worldview, and this is a big challenge for all of us. Next. So some of the areas where in particular, as we've done, followed training through, that we've found huge resistance to. I mean, pain management is like the elephant in the room. It's something that if you look through the journals, you'll find many articles that tell us that pain management, pain assessment, the use of non-pharmacological strategies is not being used as much as it could be. And it is quite shocking, really, that we still should be needing to educate people about this. Parental presence is another area where people, where you find quite fixed worldviews about parents not wanting to be present when their babies have procedures, about parents not wanting to do this, parents not wanting to do that. And it's often a feeling that this is an excuse, really, not to make parents welcome. So even in units that, trying very hard to engage parents, you come across quite strong resistance in some places. Breastfeeding is another one where we know that breastfeeding is very important and very helpful, but there's also quite a lot of resistance to that. So these are examples of, where people's worldviews are quite resistant to evidence. Next. So if we go then moving on from information and instruction and advice to the next level, this is where observation, reflection, dialogue, and coaching become very important. And so, for example, in our second level course, we start people making short observations of babies in a very structured way. We ask them to reflect on their work and provide mentoring for this. So next slide. What we're kind of working on at this point is overcoming the Dunning-Kruger effect, because when you give people a lot of information, they often become overconfident. And we frequently come across situations where managers, for example, think you can send somebody on a 2-day course and they know everything and they're going to come back and change the world. So this idea that, the Dunning-Kruger effect basically is that people who don't know much think they know a lot, and people who know a lot people who know a lot think that they don't know very much. So we have to get people over that hump. And in this second level, when people start to observe and are faced with looking at the reality of what's going on in the nursery, they begin to realize how much they don't know. And then they descend into the valley of despair, and we need to guide them through mentoring up the slope of enlightenment as their wisdom accumulates, until eventually you get to the plateau of sustainability. Next. And then when people are in this phase of beginning to know what they don't know and beginning to understand how to develop their own practice, aware of their own practice, then they begin to demonstrate good practice. In other words, to show the way. And that is a very important way of teaching people. Good practice is a very good teacher. Next, please. So then the next step on is where that experience expands into, develops, of course, with practice, but it expands to think about the big picture, to think more about how practice in the whole unit, how systems work, and how you can evaluate practice. Next slide. And we know that, for example, what makes skills really develop, what makes education stick and practice develop is not formal learning. That maybe is, classroom learning accounts for about 10%, social learning about 20%, but what really is going to make a big difference to making these skills sustainable is experiential learning through day-to-day tasks and challenges and practice. And so that's what the third level would be. Next slide. And the NIDCAP nursery program is an example of a very useful tool for actually achieving this, because it addresses standards in looking in care of the baby, care of the family, the physical environment, but also how to look after staff. And these are all topics that have come up earlier today, and this is a way of evaluating that and helping to set goals. Next slide. So then we come to the fourth level, the last level, which is where we're hoping to develop experts, people who can provide leadership, conduct research, and be teachers. And NIDCAP I put into that because as I've kind of given that priority. I know there are other programs, other very good programs out there, but as far as I know, NIDCAP is the only one that has regulated standards that's been translated into multiple languages, which is quite important. Next slide. So at expert level, we're expecting people who can observe babies, very skilled observers, people who know how to use active listening and communications, people who have mentoring skills, understand systems organization and can manage that, people who will be able to lead education and stimulate research and manage change, which is something that people are often think they should be able to do at a very early level without realizing what an advanced skill this is. Next slide, please. But having thought about having the different levels of education, we also need to think about the context in which it's going to be delivered. And one of those is obviously income levels. So this is a World Bank map of annual household income average. The darker the blue, the wealthier the countries. And you can see that the darker blue countries pretty well match up with the countries where FINE and NIDCAP are most delivered. And so there's a certain degree of inequality here, of course, into what is available to people around the world. And that is something that we have to think about. Next slide. However, even though, we might have, be well resourced, there are in countries that have quite high income levels, it's often quite difficult to educate people, to get people to see that the infant and family-centered developmental care is a necessity. So certainly from my own experience in my own country, it's quite difficult to convince people that if you don't have a huge randomized controlled trial, or if it's not on an MRI, they will consign it to the fluffy bunny bin. You actually hear people talk about it being fluffy, which is, you know, really distressing when you think about the amount of evidence that we have to support it. But getting that across is, we have to think about how do we appeal to people who are firmly fixed in that techno-scientific bias. Next slide. Another big context that seems to worry people a lot is the risk of infection. And this is also given as a major excuse for limiting parental contact. And Rosie Mendizabal did a very nice study in Mexico in which she highlighted this. And it's a problem that I've also found in other countries, particularly in some of the Eastern European post-communist countries that are still a little bit stuck in some of the old Soviet practices. So can we have the next slide, please? What Rosie did was to illustrate how this works, was that she mapped the activities of a mother and staff in one of the units she was working in. So in the top slide, you can see the mother comes in. Her first point is the sink. She washes her hands and she goes to her baby's cot. She stays with her baby and then she leaves directly. And then in the lower diagram, you see what happens in an hour with the mapping of doctors and nurses' activities. So you can see they're coming in, they don't all go to the sink, but they go here and there and cross paths and go from baby to baby and baby to bench and baby to trolley. So there's a huge amount of activity. And so sometimes you find that the parents are obliged to wear hats and shoes and gowns and all of that sort of thing because they're regarded as so dangerous for the infection they might bring in. Whereas the reality is that the doctors and nurses are more of a risk because of their having contacts with multiple babies, and very often they don't feel it's necessary to cover their hair or their feet either. So those are some issues that generate lively debate during training. Next slide. You can't force anyone to pay attention to the facts. We have to make people want to seek them out. And how do we do that? Well, one way is to, next slide. One way is to think about very simple practical tools people can use that can help them. Björn referred to this, the Evans scale, which many people have found very useful. It's simple, it's very clear, it's very easy to do, and it has multiple uses. You can use it for audit, for teaching, for self-assessment, for all sorts of things. And that something like that has become quite popular. In the fine training, we have quite a number of these practical tools that can help people to assess their practice and at the same time learn through doing it. And they're often very acceptable to their colleagues as well. So that is just an example of the sorts of things that can be useful. Next slide. And the other thing, and Zilka referred to this morning, is the power of parents. And this cannot be underestimated. I am absolutely in awe of the work that parents are doing to promote education in different countries, education in infant and family-centered developmental care. I think, we're seeing from Greece and Hungary and Romania, Lithuania, Bulgaria. We're being asked from parent groups everywhere to be involved. Next slide. And I want to introduce a couple of those people here. Olivia, she'll be talking to you later on, so I won't ask her to join me here, but what she has achieved in Hungary is spectacular. And so the whole of the eastern half of the country, all the hospitals there have now had access to Fine 1 training, and they're now working quite well on the second level training too, which is really impressive. and the energy that Olivia's put into this, and her ability to persuade people, which is very difficult to resist. Apologies, Olivia, but you are. It's very difficult to resist you, and that's one reason why you have been so successful. And we're shortly starting work in the hospitals in Budapest as well. And the next person that I want to introduce to you is Karina Croiteru from Romania. And I hope Karina is with us now. And if she is, I'm just going to ask her to talk about what has happened in Romania. Because when we started working together 2 years ago, there was a lot of muttering that said, mutter, 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 Romania isn't ready for this. But Karina has proved them wrong. So Karina, would you like to go ahead and tell people?
Yes, thank you very much, Inga. Hello, everybody. I am the founder of the Romanian Parents Association, and implementing FINE in Romania is vital with capital letters. You may be wondering why family-centered care is vital in a country in a country that is in top for infant mortality in Europe, a country where the needs for equipment are high, and it is a struggle to ensure even hygiene supplies. What is not known is that in Romania, the system of following up the long hospitalized babies is not well implemented. So that's why it's vital for those newborns to benefit from a care that takes into account their later neurodevelopment. My motivation in implementing the FINE principle in Romania comes from my own experience as a mother with premature twins, a mother who was allowed to hold her baby in her arms only after 724 hours, that means approximately 30 days. Even so, even after this very long time, I felt that it was this experience that saved both of us. Not the incubator, not the drugs, but the fact that I could hold my baby in my arms and become again one body from which to separate slowly. After 2 years of FINE implementation in Romania, in 4 maternities, the best thing that has changed is the role of parents. So our role has been called into question, that we no longer need to be visitors, but to be allowed to be carers, to be parents. The idea of caring for newborns, considering further neurodevelopment, was again an important and new idea for our doctors and nurses. These 2 ideas, supported by the FINE curriculum, have caused the Romanian medical system to change for better. The easiest to implement was the positioning of newborn in incubator. Progress has been made also on the level of light and noise in the NICU. The handling is smoother now, but this is a chapter where more work is needed. There is still work to be done on family involvement in the care of the newborn in NICU. During these last 2 years, also our capacity of our NGO has increased in terms of knowledge level. So our position has changed. The doctors report to us on a level of equality. We advise each other for the good of the baby. So thank you very much, Inga, for your work and for your inspirational team, for all our achievements. I also want to thank IFCDC for their advices on our long way, and also for creating such a supportive network. I'll fight for the future implementation in my country, and I hope one day we'll also have need gap specialists in Romania.
Lovely, thank you very much. And that's very much the point of having a step-by-step process, is to move towards that, so that so that this work becomes sustainable. And that is a big challenge. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, these are some pictures from training in Romania. And next one.
Trebuia să le fi dat pe ăsta, dar n-am mai dat nici.
So it's very enjoyable as well as very productive. Thank you, Karina. It's amazing what you have achieved. I've been absolutely so proud to be part of that. Next slide, please. So I don't have a lot of experience of working in low-income countries, but I know that in, well, I think apart from Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, but I know that in some places it's big organizations that are doing a lot of work, and in sometimes it's just little organizations that are doing work. And one of those is BirthLink, and you see in this picture Kathy Meller, who runs BirthLink. She's the person behind it all. This is her. She's at Panzi Hospital in Congo, which is Denis Mukwege's hospital, where they've been concentrating a lot on breastfeeding and kangaroo care. But she's also been very interested in how we can bring education for family and developmental care to countries that are not well resourced. Next slide, please. So we have been working together on some very simple tools. So we call the program Supporting Family and Developmental Care in the Nursery. And next slide, please. And so she has developed slideshows and also kind of flip chart, books that you can flip over, which have very simple instructions and suggestions, and very simple, very clear diagrams. So you have very strong visual prompts, and they can be adjusted, the babies can be adjusted in these to fit different countries, different ethnic groups. And so these are designed really very much for beginners, but to bring out the basic principles. There are pages on environment, on kangaroo care, on pain management, on handling, lifting, communication with parents, and a whole lot of things. It's a very nice project. And if you want to know more about that, please do contact me and I can tell you about it and share some of that with you. Next slide, please. Evaluation is very difficult because this is not an intervention. We can't just easily measure babies who've had it and babies who haven't, because it isn't babies that get it, it's the staff, so it's indirect. So we have done some surveys in the UK using questionnaires similar to the ones used for NIDCAT research in several other countries, looking at these domains. Next slide, please. And what we found that the perceptions of staff who worked in units where there had been fairly regular courses at both levels 1 and 2. So I think about 20% of the staff had had some education, although the people who replied to the survey, 2/3 of them had not had it, but the idea was to find out whether they perceived there had been improvements in their unit overall since the training was introduced, and the results were very positive and highly significant. This was published in the Journal of Neonatal Nursing last April. But you can see that in terms of the infant's well-being and the infant's safety, and that's particularly important because the managers, they do want to know that making these changes are safe. The integration of parents into the baby's life, the environment for the baby, all of them were significant. The ones that were least positive, where there were a few more people demurring, were in the effect of the environment on staff, and that usually, as usual, is something to do with lighting. And the working conditions was affected by, from the comments, we could see that quite a lot of those problems were to do with staffing levels and people not getting their breaks and that kind of thing. Next slide. We also asked people who'd attended the basic level of care, basic level training, whether or not they felt more able to involve parents in the infant's care after they had done the course. So, and again, as you can see, the green bars here, the turquoise bars here, show for 9 different activities that parents were involved in. That was a very significant improvement in how confident people felt about involving parents. And that's what we really wanted to achieve. So we were pleased with that. Next slide. So take home message then. One of the things we think it is very important to have a tiered pathway where people can progress at their own speed. If you're just starting out, you may only want to first do the first level. You may want to move on at different paces until you get to the expert level, but it's important to have a clear pathway ahead of you that you can follow, and that is regulated for quality as well. The big problem is going to be shortage of faculty, because as the FIND program is showing, the demand is growing enormously, and finding people at an advanced and expert level who can do the teaching, the coaching and the mentoring is going to be a big challenge. We do need to have more advanced training. Interestingly, in Hungary, we've started to use parents as faculty, which I think is really useful, because as they said to me, you need to put your money where your mouth is, sort of thing, that, you're talking about involving parents and this all being parent-centered. So parents need to be involved in the teaching, parents need to be involved in the attending the courses, and that is what is happening there. Also, you need to be able to fit the education to the context and the biases that predominate in certain different contexts, and also some of the political influences. So your training needs to have a degree of flexibility in order to do that. The idea of shared resources is a good one, and looking at how we can do that, how we can share our knowledge about internet sites and things that are useful, but also perhaps having a shared version, our own version of Wikipedia that people can look things up on. The evidence-based standards, I think, are a huge boost to this, very, very helpful. And then finally, to keep thinking about how we can evaluate the value of education, how we can demonstrate that it is worth investing in this. So we need some more research. Next slide. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. If you want to contact me, if you've got information to share or want to know more about some of the things I've raised, you can contact me on this email address. And I also send out a newsletter every quarter, which summarizes recent research to keep people up to date on new research. And it also has other information about new developments, new resources, and educational opportunities. So if you go to www.earlybabies.com, you'll find a subscribe button and you'll get on the mailing list, and I'll send that out to you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Inga. Fantastic lecture, and very, very important work, and amazing the quick spread throughout the world. Actually, we have a question from Veronique in France. Inga, could you comment the slide with the Bliss survey? Did you understand that the professionals feel less comfortable to perform the care after the training? Were they able to reflect about the rhythm, or could you please?
No, they were more confident. Maybe looking at it upside down. No, they were significantly more confident about involving parents in the baby's care, very significantly. Yeah. So it was appeared to be very effective in that way. Thank you. If I didn't make
these
that
kind
clear.
of surveys, they are methodologically not so difficult. So I mean, you can use them as descriptive
Yes, they are. But I mean, it's just as a you know, in the ranking of evidence, surveys don't rank very high, and they're full of pitfalls. But it's very difficult to find another way to do it, unless you do quite extensive evaluations before you start training on a unit, train the whole unit, and then do it again. But unfortunately, that doesn't always happen that way. For us, it's trickling. You get 1 or 2 people do the training, and then 1 or 2 more, and so on. It's not, you can't do a before and after.
You can actually turn on your video, because so what about the yellow bars in the Bliss? What do you think about the yellow bars in Bliss?
In the Bliss,
here we go.
Okay, so
less able.
Yeah, those were people. The green ones at the very end were people who it was not applicable, but the yellow ones were people who felt less able, which is quite interesting. It was a small portion, but it was still somewhat worrying that anybody should be less able, and maybe that's because they then knew what they didn't know.
Exactly, that's what I think.
Yeah.
We have to realize that when you start training people in this, some will become very disturbed for what they have done over the years.
Absolutely, that is very true. And that's why with the second level in particular, when people are doing observations and really realizing that they've never looked at babies before and have never really understood the impact of what they're doing, it can be really quite painful. And that's one reason why you need really supportive mentoring.
Yes. Sorry. Very good. Sorry. Okay. Inga? Stina, should we continue or?
Thank you so much, Inga.
You're okay. Bye. Bye.